Welcome, everyone, to today's webinar, The Educational System and the Social Integration of Foreign-Born Children, hosted by the Institute on Immigration, Integration, Research, and Policy at the Rockefeller Institute of Government, State University of New York. It is a pleasure to have such a distinguished group of experts, educators, and policymakers join us to explore how education serves as a bridge for immigrant students, helping them integrate, thrive, and contribute to society. Good morning, everyone. I am Guillermo Martinez, Deputy Director and Intergovernmental Liaison at the Institute. Education is more than just an academic instruction. It is a powerful tool for inclusion, opportunity, and social cohesion. Simon Bolivar once said, "Nations march to greatness at the same rate as their educational systems evolve." His words remind us that the strength and progress of a society are directly tied to the quality of and accessibility to its education system. For foreign-born children, a strong and equitable education system is essential to the successful integration and, as importantly, to our nation's strong and successful future. Today, we will begin to examine what strategies that have helped overcome some challenges and opportunities built to ensure that all children, regardless of their country of origin, have access to quality education that enables them to reach their full potential. Thank you for being part of this important conversation. Now I would like to introduce an amazing educator, leader, and change agent, Dr. Dina Refke, Executive Director of the Institute. Dr. Refke, the microphone is yours.
Thank you so much, Guillermo, for your kind introduction. So as Guillermo Martinez said, today we are examining the critical role that the educational system in general and the K-12 system in particular plays in the social integration of foreign-born children. And for most immigrant children, the educational system is the golden gate to social integration. As Guillermo mentioned, schools provide English language learning programs that are critical to thriving economically, socially, and psychologically. They are the source of English language acquisition, but for any language program to be effective, it must be tied to affirming identities, affirming people, affirming the self. Scholars argue that these programs must be connected to acts of speaking, presentations of self, and projections of identity. That's what makes effective English language learning and any language learning program. So schools play a critical role in integrating immigrant children socially by creating bilingual programs that build confidence, transitions, and English language acquisition. Social integration and cohesion require the adoption of pedagogies and curriculum design, as well as curriculum content that validate identities as a tool to counteract exclusions, biases, and stereotyping, and as a tool to create spaces where all identities are valued and appreciated. This is not just a good thing for immigrant children. It is a good thing for every child. All children thrive when they experience a world that is safe, compassionate, respectful, and affirming. Schools are the first line of defense. They may be the only direct line to new immigrant parents and immigrant communities. They can help mitigate the devastating impacts of poverty and lack of resources, access to resources by immigrant parents. They can help address the debilitating impacts of trauma and dislocation that are often experienced by immigrant families. Educational institutions are indeed the lifeline for many immigrant children, yet lack of access to resources can and does impact the ability of these institutions to effectively fulfill their promise. So we have an incredible line of distinguished speakers who will speak to the work that they have been doing and their institutions have been championing. As they advance the integration of all children and the well-being of all children, they will showcase models of the educational system that they use and their institutions use to fulfill the mission of social and economic integration of foreign-born children. It is my pleasure now to turn it over to Adriana Mentarsi, a fellow on immigrant integration at the Institute. Adriana.
Thank you, Dr. Refke. Good morning, everyone. I am honored to serve as your moderator today. This discussion is especially timely as we explore how educational institutions can better support refugees, asylees, and immigrant children in achieving academic success and social integration. It is my distinct honor to introduce our keynote speaker for today, Chancellor Melissa Aviles Ramos. As the Chancellor of New York City Public Schools, the largest school system in the nation, Chancellor Aviles Ramos plays a pivotal role in shaping policies and programs that impact over 1 million students. Prior to her current role, she served as the Deputy Chancellor of Family and Community Engagement and External Affairs, as well as Chief Staff to former Chancellor David C. Banks. In those roles, she oversaw innovative family engagement programs such as New York City Literacy Hubs and our Family Literacy Ambassadors. She also launched and led Project Open Arms, an unprecedented effort to welcome, enroll, and support 54,000 plus of our newest New Yorkers. So please join me in welcoming Chancellor Melissa Aviles Ramos. The microphone is yours, Chancellor.
Thank you so much, Adriana, for that very kind and warm introduction. Dina, your words were extremely powerful. And Guillermo, thank you so much for making this all happen and for inviting me to join you today. It is an honor to be here with all of you, and just knowing how many of us are really working together in our shared agenda to make sure that all children are welcome and loved and cared for in our public school systems. Here at New York City Public Schools, we know that diversity and multilingualism are our superpowers. And while there are some folks who might think that those are deficits, we know what happens when children speak more than one language. We know what happens when children feel affirmed and loved. And we know what happens when instruction and curriculum reflects the different communities that we serve. And so I do want to talk to you today about something very, very near and dear to me, Project Open Arms. And this can sometimes be referred to, or usually referred to, as an initiative. But to be very honest with you, for me, it was a movement. I was about 4 weeks into my time at central office as a senior executive director working for the first deputy chancellor when we heard from City Hall and our partner agencies that buses with asylum-seeking families were coming 500-600 people sometimes a day. And immediately we had to think about how we were going to make sure that our youngest and newest New Yorkers were going to be cared for in the system. While these systems and structures already existed in New York City, because we are no stranger to keeping our doors open for all children at any time, the volume was unprecedented. And so Project Open Arms was a cross-functional interagency initiative to support the tens of thousands of our newest New Yorkers. And as the central point person, I had to work very quickly to take inventory of our resources, both intra and interagency. And so we had to do a checklist. How do we get our students enrolled? How do we make sure that food and clothing are available to them? How do we make sure that families who are not going to family welcome centers to register their child or who are going directly to schools are getting the right support that they need to quickly enroll them? What about vaccinations? What about translations? And most of all, how do we set up structures that pour into the family so that they feel welcomed and loved throughout this process? I am a mother of a New York City public school student, and I have lived in the Bronx my entire life. I'm first generation Puerto Riqueña. And so I sit in a very privileged seat because in having my daughter enrolled in New York City public schools, when things are foggy or I'm unsure of something and I need a thought partner as a parent, I can pick up the phone and call anyone. And even with that, navigating this massive system is sometimes very difficult. So imagine what that must feel like for a parent who is new to this country, new to this city. Some of the journeys are incredibly traumatic, and trying to make sure that their children are settled quickly. And so with that, we knew we had to lead with empathy, we had to lead with efficiency, we had to lead with compassion. Through Project Open Arms, we also set up something called borough response teams, quickly recognizing that the central office didn't have capacity to set up food pantries, connect with existing food pantries, to set up resource fairs, to work on the ground, supporting with vaccinations, All the elected officials were just raising their hands to help. The parents were raising their hands to help. So we said, let's set up borough response teams. So that way, understanding every single borough, every single neighborhood has its own flavor. So we said these borough response teams will be comprised of elected officials and parents and other volunteers and advocates, students who want to set up these resource fairs, set up these clothing drives, set up these food drives, work with our STH coordinators. And it was such a powerful thing to see that these borough response teams became so big that we actually had to run multiple meetings at multiple times throughout the days and the weeks because everyone wanted to coordinate with us and support. Project Russo was a phenomenal partner. And this actually is how I met my very, very dear friend, Assemblywoman Catalina Cruz, and her chief of staff, Robin Ennis, because they were on the ground taking charge and were educating me on all the resources that existed. And so Project Open Arms quickly became a movement that we were so proud of because it showed what happens when New Yorkers stand together and stand up for one another. We saw young people enter the school system with buddies. So we would pair them up with buddies who spoke their language and who helped them navigate the school. We made sure that clothing and food were available to students because in many cases, young people were coming inappropriately dressed, right? They were not prepared for inclement weather in the winter. And so we needed to make sure coats and hats and gloves were available for them. But one story that I want to share you that goes far beyond the logistical pieces we did to set this up, but really shows how amazing and resilient our young people are, especially when we give them the resources they need to succeed, is about a little girl who was in the Bronx in one of our middle schools in District 11. She barely spoke English, and when she met former Chancellor David C. Banks, she practiced for a week how to say good morning and thank you for this honor because she was so honored to be in her school. So I went back to see her a year later, not even a year, maybe 8 months later. And she was speaking in English and in Spanish, and she was helping other young people who had come into the school and who were newly arrived. And the assistant principal pulled me to the side and said, I'm so proud of this young person because through our respect for all work, she identified the signs when someone is in crisis. And her friend was very much in crisis. And this young lady went to the school counselor and said, I'm worried about my friend. All the things you taught us are happening to her. Well, the school had her assessed, and it turns out that that student was very much planning on hurting herself. And if it were not for that young girl who stood up and said, I'm seeing these signs in my friend, in my buddy who welcomed me to this country, to this school when I first arrived, we don't know what the outcome would have been. And so that young woman not only began to master 2 languages, not only excelled in school, she became a leader in her school, and she quite frankly saved a life. And so I share all of the logistical things we did, from the attendance monitoring to the resources to partnering with great people like you and our elected officials. But most importantly, what I want to impress upon all of you is that these are children. These are children who need us. These are children who thrive, and they are the future of our city. And with just a little bit that we've given them, they've given a whole lot more to us. And so I want to leave time for any questions if that's appropriate. But I most importantly just want to thank everyone and remind you that this work is far from done. New York City Public Schools is far from done. Our work is not perfect, but we are very proud of the support that we've received to welcome our newest New Yorkers, and we have no intention of stopping anytime soon.
Thank you so much, Chancellor. So since Chancellor could stay for a little bit for questions, maybe I would also allow the audience to send questions through the chat box if you have any. And while we're waiting for that, I would like to ask one question for Chancellor. What institutional arrangements that have proven most effective so far from what you have seen in supporting immigrant children's success? And also, where do you see room for improvement in New York State's educational system?
Great question. One of the things that we started doing through Project Open Arms is really partnering with our Safety and Youth Development Division in getting more social workers in the schools. But we wanted to make sure that the social workers actually had an investment and understanding of the communities that they serve. So being really intentional about pairing social workers who share similar backgrounds and languages and religions, so that way students feel very comfortable and very seen. We know that this is a key component in mental health. We also set up our telemental health system so that way young people can reach out if they didn't necessarily want to talk to someone in person and ask for help, and we made that widely available. The other thing that we've done is really expand our transitional bilingual programs. This is work that started even before Project Open Arms, but understanding the power in honoring students' multilingualism and fostering biliteracy and multiliteracy is so important to our young people. So we definitely worked with superintendents and principals to make sure we were expanding those programs. The other thing that we did was really work in close concert with our students and temporary housing coordinators. These are the folks who are the bridge between DHS and Department of Education. They get to know our families well. They would tell us what are the things that are needed on the ground to support the families. They were also integral in letting us know when families were transitioning, sometimes leaving the shelter to be with family members. And unfortunately, when the city started the 60-day rule and families started shifting into other shelters, we needed a way without compromising anyone's identity to really know when families are shifting so we could provide busing and very, very fast school transfer should the families want that, because families do have the right to stay in their schools. But many of them did want the transfer. More often than not, though, they wanted to stay in their schools because they love their schools so much. And so the busing had to be done very, very quickly. So these are some of the things that we did to make sure that to the extent possible, there were seamless transitions, but nothing is completely seamless, especially in a city this size with so many different moving pieces. In terms of educational policy, we really need to do more in the academic support for our young people. Standardized testing, while there is a small window, they don't have to sit for testing. Thinking about the role standardized tests play for young people who are brilliant, but often not literate in their native language. And so while we build that biliteracy, that multiliteracy, how do we assess young people in a way that reflects their cognitive abilities, their social emotional abilities without putting a number on them? But also it's a delicate balance in making sure that expectations are high and that young people are not slipping through the cracks, because we know that while you are learning English or any other language, that does not mean that you are not able to process the rich information that you're being presented with. And so those are the things that I think we need to do better at across the country, not just here in New York. But yep, said a lot, so I'll stop talking now.
Okay, thank you so much, Chancellor. So there is one question apparently from the audience. How can one become involved with Project Open Arms?
Love that question. So our team is right now being run by Tamara Mayer, who is one of our amazing administrators down at Central. And when I transitioned to this current role, we moved that to Deputy Chancellor Emma Vadera in our operations office. So I am going to share Tamara's email address. And if anybody is interested, she's always very happy to provide briefings on what we're doing, very, very detailed, especially by district and by borough, and also let you know what are the opportunities for you to partner with us to serve our community.
All right, you said that you would share the details of emails, Chancellor?
Her email. I'm
Yeah,
going
her
to
email.
put Tamara's email.
Okay, do you want to put it in the chat box or?
Yep, I'm putting it in the chat right now.
All right, thank you so much, Chancellor. So Before we move forward, I'd like to take a moment to sincerely thank Chancellor Melissa Aviles Ramos for her time and valuable insights today. We truly appreciate her leadership and dedication to ensuring the success of immigrant students in New York City schools. Unfortunately, due to a prior engagement, Chancellor Aviles Ramos will not be able to stay for the remainder of the webinar. However, we are incredibly grateful for her presence and the perspectives that she has shared with us. So thank you once again, Chancellor Aviles Ramos, for your commitment and for being with us today. And thank you also for sharing the email of Tamara Mir, Project Open Arms. So for the audience who asked the question earlier, you could reach out to the person suggested by the Chancellor here.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. Great to see
Thank
you.
you so
Thank
much.
you.
All right. So now, everyone, we have an incredible lineup of experts who will share their insights and experiences on best practices, challenges, and policy solutions. We have three panelists today. I am going to introduce all of you to these three panelists. The first one is Dr. Gladys I. Cruz. She is the District Superintendent, Questar 3, BOCES. And the second panelist is PhD candidate Rachel Stedt. She is the interim director of ENL and Refugee Students, City School District of Albany. She is also the founding principal of the Albany International Academy. And the third panelist that we have today is Dr. Corinne Cantor. She is the manager of research and policy, President's Alliance on Higher Education, and a 2023 American Council of Learned Societies Leading Edge Fellow. You can find more details about their profiles on the webinar page. I'm not going to explain the bio further, but before we begin, I'd like to extend a sincere thank you for our distinguished speakers and all attendees for joining us today. Now let's dive into our discussion. We would like to start with Dr. Gladys I. Cruz to share her thoughts.
Good morning, everyone. It is a true honor to be here with you this morning and to be with the amazing panelists that share this space. I actually have a firsthand experience as a limited Spanish proficient child in Puerto Rico, a limited English proficient child in New York. I went to school between the two systems, and I struggled because I was immersed in a English only system while I was speaking Spanish at home, and Spanish was my first language, and then being immersed in a Spanish only system in Puerto Rico when I was starting to gain mastery in English. So my experiences navigating between different languages and cultures really shaped my commitment to equitable education for English language learners, for students who are coming to this country, because I know firsthand, I understand firsthand what that experience is like. I also am the parent of two children that came here at ages 6 and 8, who were Spanish speakers. So they came here as English, limited English proficient children. I started my career in Puerto Rico as a teacher over 40 years ago, and then came to New York over 30 years ago to do a PhD at UAlbany in curriculum instruction. I then started my professional career here at Questar 3 BOCES, working for what was then the Bilingual Education Technical Assistance Center, now known as the Regional Bilingual Education Resource Network. We have worked over the past 30 years with school leaders, principals, educators to provide support resources for English language learners. Now over 30 years later, we continue to serve 150 districts, school districts in 19 counties. One of my favorite projects really is the Puerto Rican Hispanic Youth Leadership Institute. This has been a program that's connected with the Puerto Rican Hispanic Senate and Assembly Task Force. And we bring over 250 students every year to the Capitol to debate bills that are live in the Assembly. This program is about developing leadership and helping those children, and many are newcomers to this country, to gain confidence, to learn to advocate for themselves, their families, their younger siblings. And it is a program that has had huge success over the past 35 years. It's a program to really start developing that leadership that we need in this area. We also operate adult education programs, including ESL classes for immigrants and other adults. It is critical that at this time in our history and in our country, we continue to strengthen the programs and services for our immigrant children, the programs for these children, because we know what the landscape is in our country these days. And we, as Chancellor Avilés Ramos said, we need to make sure that our schools are places where these children feel safe. Many times it is the place where they get their meals for the day. It is a place where they learn to the language of this the language of the school system. So we need to continue to work together and work together with community agencies so that we can all row in the same direction to support the immigrant children and their families.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Cruz. And now we're going to go to our second speaker, Interim Director, Rachel State.
Hi, good morning. I'm so honored to be here today and really want to extend my gratitude for being invited and to sit among the other esteemed panelists. I am currently in my 28th year as an educator in New York State, having begun my career as an ESL teacher, as it was known at the time. And then, I taught for a number of years before moving into administration. And during that time, I've always overseen programming related to English language learners. And I'm currently the interim director of ENL and Refugee Services in the City School District of Albany, where we are just shy of 2,000 English language learners, which is about 1 out of every 5 students in the district. This represents a 100% increase since the 2016-17 school year, which is right before I arrived here in the district to start what was then known as the Albany International Center. And that was begun as a transitional newcomer program for grades 6 through 12, what was a response to what was then an increase in enrollment in ELL students, newcomer students in the district. Albany is a refugee resettlement city, and one of our community partners is USCRI, who is the agency tasked with resettling those who come through the refugee resettlement program here in the city. So many families were moving here, and the district created that program. Shortly after COVID, the program was expanded into the elementary grades and relocated along with a dual language program that had already existed, but the district decided that they were going to expand it. So we began by adding another section at each grade level. We're currently in the midst of that expansion, but to me, that was really serendipitous because that expansion occurred right at the time that we started to see an increase in arrivals here in the city school district. So currently, our school is a pre-K through grade 11 building, which is a really unique configuration. Our enrollment stands at about 500 students, and more than 60% of our staff is either bilingual, bicultural, or both. So within our school, the newcomer alternative program has the goal of transitioning our students to the homeschool setting after a period of time. And then that sits side by side with the dual language program, which is a pre-K through 5 program, and students then move on to middle school from that program. So we have a lot going on in our setting, but I'm really proud of our staff and our students. When we were thinking about how to design this school, we really thought about both academics and the social emotional learning component through a trauma-informed lens. So, with academics, we wanted to ensure that we're providing not only standalone ENL instruction, but also the integrated content and ENL instruction as required under the Commissioner's Regulations, Part 154. And this work is ongoing, but some things that we have done to try to strengthen that instruction is that we have been given, we give teachers the time to update curriculum maps that integrate the content with the English language development. We see the role of the ENL teacher not simply to modify in the classroom, but also to bring that separate content of English language development and marry it to the content. We also do this with Spanish language development in the dual language program. Teachers also have dedicated co-planning time to develop the co-teaching relationship, which is absolutely critical to the success of that model. And then from a social emotional perspective, we also thought about some of the protective factors that would support our newcomer students and families as they transition to the new community, and then also support their success in school. So that configuration I mentioned, that is a pre-K through grade 11 continuum, really kept siblings together. And that was important to our families because while we are a relatively small city, the schools can be spread out. And so we didn't want the experience of our families to be that they have to bring younger students to one school while then having, to bring middle school students to another location and then high school students to a third. So by keeping siblings together, that was really something that that families said they appreciated in that first year or so of being here, because older siblings could sometimes walk younger siblings home. And that was important to them. We also have developed relationships with community partners to support wraparound services. So for example, we have a community health clinic that brings a medical van on site weekly. This has gone a long way in assisting us with keeping students immunized and keeping up to date with physicals. We have a family intake center where we have a food pantry, and with support from the local Albany Fund for Education, we have funding to purchase culturally relevant food from small business owners within the community. We, part of that is giving back to the community and supporting the local community. So this week we are preparing food packages for students and families to pick up prior to Eid to support that cultural celebration for them. It also includes a clothing room with winter weather wear, school supplies. We have a community-based mental health counselor on site, so students do not miss school in order to go to an outside provider. We have that relationship right in the building. And then we have extended day programming through another community partner called RISE, and they are an agency in the city that supports refugee and immigrant families. And so they do extended day programming. We also have implemented as part of our SEL something called Strong for Schools, which is an acronym, stands for Supporting the Transition Resilience of Newcomer Groups. We are piloting it this year as a Tier 2 intervention, but it is something that seems to be going well and is really rooted in the experience of the newcomer student and helping them understand how their identity has been shaped and what resources they have to rely on as they continue through life. And then we've also been implementing restorative practices in the form of community circles. We do these every other week. They're facilitated by trained teachers and student support staff to help bring student voice and experience to the setting and help students work through different challenges or different things that they're experiencing. And we've also used our grant funding, both Title III, and then we have something called the Refugee School Impact Grant to support our extended day and our summer programming. This has also funded some bilingual community engagement liaisons who assist students with things like homework help, crisis management, connection to community resources, getting immunized, etc. So I'm really proud of the work that we've done. However, there is still much more to be done. We're not finished. But one of the nicest compliments I think I've ever received is when visitors come to our school and they comment on just how happy the students appear to be in the setting. And that to me means everything. I know we have more work to do, but if students are happy at school and they feel safe, then I think we're off to a great start.
All right, thank you, Interim Director Stead. And now we have our third panelist, Dr. Kenter. The microphone is yours.
Thank you so much. And I just want to echo the gratitude of my fellow panelists for the invitation to join you all today. And I have already learned so much just listening to what everyone else has shared. And if you see my eyes glancing to my second monitor, it's because I've been taking some furious notes as everyone else has shared their insights from the wonderful work that they're doing. So my name is Corinne Kentor, and I am the Manager of Research and Policy at the President's Alliance on Higher Education and Immigration. I'll give you a little bit of context on the President's Alliance and the work we do, and then speak a bit about my background in working with immigrant origin families in both K-12 and higher education settings. I can talk a lot, but I'm going to try to keep this brief to leave time for questions and to make sure that my comments are useful to the attendees today. So for those who are not familiar with the President's Alliance, we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that represents about 600 college and university leaders throughout the United States. The institutions that we work with are in every kind of setting. They are in rural settings and urban settings and suburban settings. They are community college leaders, leaders of private and faith-based institutions, leaders of large research systems, and public university systems. And they are also in all different political settings with different relationships to their representatives. And the goal of the President's Alliance really is to advocate for the issues that impact all immigrant origin populations in higher education. So our team works at 3 levels: federal level, the state level, and the institutional or campus level. I sit on the federal policy team, but as our research manager, I sort of touch on all of those different areas. And then we also work across populations. So our work touches on issues impacting immigrant origin students, faculty, and staff. And this includes undocumented individuals with and without DACA or Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals status, refugee and displaced populations, including asylum seekers and parolees and temporary protected status holders, and international students and scholars. And the reason that our work is so broad and crosses all of these different populations is because there actually is more intersection among these groups than it might initially appear. Statuses are fluid, and policies that seem on the surface to impact one population may have implications for another. So our team really tries to think about those different connecting points and to think holistically about policies and practices that can support all immigrant origin individuals in higher education. So kind of to rewind from where I sit currently and the work that we do at the President's Alliance, my background is in mixed status immigrant families transitions from high school into post-secondary settings. So I think a lot about kind of what happens as children and their families progress through these fantastic programs that my colleagues have described today and start to think about their next steps after K-12 education, whether that is pursuing different job opportunities, starting a business, or pursuing post-secondary education. And what I think is really important and what has already been elevated today is to remember that educational pathways are family initiatives. These are not things that students are doing on their own. They are doing them in connection with their loved ones and with their communities. And so as we're thinking about policies and practices that support students in our classrooms, we also need to be thinking about the policies and practices that impact their loved ones outside of the school setting, because those experiences are coming with them into the educational environment and can also influence how they feel about their options after high school. So again, I sit kind of in the federal policy level now, but I did all of my graduate training and my original work in this area in New York. So this is sort of a homecoming for me, even though I'm zooming in from DC today. So prior to my work with the President's Alliance, I worked at the Office of Research, Evaluation, and Data Analytics for the City University of New York, where I worked similarly on topics or programs rather, that try to facilitate transitions from high school into the CUNY system. New York is really beautifully positioned in that it has these deep relationships between our K-12 institutions and our higher education institutions. And it's a really important reminder for me that professionals in each of these settings bring different experiences and different knowledge, but need to be talking to one another. It is really critical that our professional development opportunities not be segregated by the institution that you work in. If you sit at a higher education institution, you have to be talking to your colleagues in K-12 settings in order to understand kind of their processes and their conversations with families. And similarly, if you are a K-12 educator, it's really critical to be talking to your colleagues in higher education to think about what their needs are, where they're seeing the gaps for students coming into higher ed, and ways that you can support. I have a whole lot of thoughts on very specific things that we can get into when it comes to financial support for transitions into higher education, family and cultural support, postgraduate employment opportunities. I could go on and on and on. And I could also talk a bit about ways to make sure that families feel safe and secure in your school environment, particularly given the rise in anti-immigrant rhetoric nationally and with a particular focus on sanctuary cities and states. But I want to pause to make sure that we leave time for questions and to kind of formulate my thoughts in response to the interests of the attendees today. So I'm going to stop there for now, but happy to jump back in to talk a little bit more about any of those topics.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Kenter. So I would like to thank once again for our panelists for sharing such valuable insights on improving educational outcomes for immigrant children. So now we will delve deeper into topics such as institutional support, bilingual education, mental health interventions, and policy implications. I have a set of prepared questions to guide our conversations. And by the end of the discussion, I will open the Q&A session for additional questions from our audience. Or while we are having the discussion, you could also type in your questions to the chat box and we will get to the questions from the audience after we're done with the guided conversation. So this is the same question that I asked to the Chancellor before. We're talking about the institutional arrangement that you think have proven most effective in supporting immigrant children's success and where you see improvement in New York State's educational system. So I would like to start with that question, and I would ask our panelists to share their thoughts on this. Director Stead, perhaps, would like to start?
Hi. So one of the things I think that has really gone a long way in our district is the support of the Board of Education and with the local elected officials. I think there's a great deal of support for our programming. And I also think, Albany being a sanctuary city, there's a lot of support around us. But with that, also kind of along that lines, one of the things that I think could happen in terms of a structural, arrangement at the state level is when we are preparing our teachers, how are we ensuring that when they become certified, that they have the, understanding and the background in how to educate multilingual learners. Currently, there is not a requirement. And so often, teachers, when they land in schools through no fault of their own, they just have not been prepared to teach all of the students in front of them. And so, I do think that by doing that, we would help everyone understand that we are all educators of multilingual learners, that everyone should be involved. And so I do think that that would be one thing that I would recommend that could help us.
Okay, thank you, Director Stead. The second panelist, Dr. Cruz.
So to build on what Rachel just said, I think it's important to, and what our other panelists said, it's so important to have those relationships between the K-12 system and higher education. And I will give an example of some things that we're doing here in the BOCES. So we created a seniors only Pathways in Education program. That program is located on the SUNY campus. It takes students who are interested in exploring careers in education. It has been a hugely successful program. And in that program, students are able to do like practicums in the different schools in the region. These students are so well prepared to enter and really deal with the different student populations that are being served in our schools and the different needs that our students are bringing to the school system. We recently had the opportunity to participate in a panel at the Board of Regents meeting. And it was amazing to see one of our graduates talk about how well prepared she was to enter the classroom given this program at the high school level. And then she went through her teacher ed program and became certified, is now teaching in one of our districts. So that relationship with the higher ed is critical. We have another program that we created about 4 years ago, which we partnered with UAlbany again, and it's Foundations of Teaching and Learning. And that program was to try to retain our teaching assistants that are so critical in all of our classrooms, and also our career and technical education teachers. So what we did, and this refers back to what Rachel was just talking about, what we did is we created a very intentional program with very critical coursework, not just coursework that is coming off the shelf, to address the current needs in the classroom. So addressing students with special needs, addressing students who come speaking languages other than English, addressing students with mental health issues, classroom management, behavior issues. So we created, with UAlbany, we created micro-credentials, a series of 3 micro-credentials that lead to certification for participants. And this program has been very successful. We have certified many of our teaching assistants. They have either been certified and or achieved a higher level of certification. We've also certified a lot of our CTE teachers. And once they finish, my intention, when I went to the board, we have a very supportive board. I went to the board and I said, listen, we have this retention problem with our staff. Can we do this? And they said, go for it. And then when this first cohort of 20 finished the program, they said, we don't want to end. Can we have more? And if you come to me and you want to learn more and you want more professional development, you want more education, I'm always going to say yes. So we created a next level, and it's Foundations of Teaching and Learning 2. And it's another 3 courses from the University of Albany that we created that support the current needs in the classroom. And so now these participants are gaining up to 18 college credits. They're getting certified where the retention is better, but above all, instruction is changing and the needs of the students are being met. These educators are developing their own professional networks, that are informal. They're talking about what's working in the classroom. They're sharing ideas. So it has really elevated. These 2 examples have really elevated the education of our students. And so I can't stress enough the importance of having those partnerships with higher ed to continue to uplift your educators.
Thank you, Dr. Cruz. And now the third panelist, Dr. Kenter. So I believe that from the previous 2 speakers, we have seen how important it is to have the cooperation between K-12 and higher ed. And this is something that President Alliance has been doing, I believe.
Yes, and we do have quite a number of resources. I'll share some links when I finish speaking as well. I don't know that I have the ability to chat with attendees, but I can send them to the host and panelists to share out more broadly. One thing to flag that you can also see on my snazzy background is the Higher Ed Immigration Portal. This is a collaborative resource that the President's Alliance manages, but that is formed of resources contributed by a whole bunch of partner organizations. So this is a great kind of go-to place to find up-to-date resources, both on the policy side and on the practitioner side. Anything you can think of really related to higher ed access for immigrant origin populations. And I'll share a couple of specific links in just a moment. Regarding the kind of original question about institutional arrangements, I wanted to kind of elevate what has been said by my fellow panelists and then also give a slight extension on it. So we've been talking a lot about ensuring that teachers are prepared to meet the students in their classrooms. And I want to remind everyone here that it's not just the teachers interacting with students and families. As we heard from the chancellor's remarks, it sometimes can be difficult to predict who will be the first face that a newly arrived family will see. Sometimes they will go through a sort of established program or platform, and sometimes they'll show up at your school and meet the person kind of manning security at the front desk or something like that. And so this is where it becomes really important to think about everyone in your school as being an education access professional. Everybody who is there has the opportunity to affirm or discourage a family's sense of belonging when they arrive on your campus. An example that I used to give a lot when I was at CUNY is I would take folks who came to my presentations through the pathway that a student needed to navigate to submit one form to adjust their financial aid package. This was one physical piece of paper that they needed to submit, and it often took visits of up to 7 or 10 offices to be directed to the right person where that form needed to go. This used to happen in person. Now a lot of this happens by email, but I think the sentiment is the same, which is that each of those 7 or 10 interactions is an opportunity for that student to feel like they belong on their college campus, like their experiences are valid, like they are somebody who is ready to do college, or for them to feel like they have already made a mistake just in trying to turn in a form. And so it really is important that every person on your campus be involved in these conversations about what it means to welcome students and their loved ones into an educational environment. And so what does this actually look like practically? Obviously, my expertise is at the higher ed level, but this does apply to K-12 settings as well. We really recommend creating immigration task forces, and this needs to come from the leadership level. In higher ed, this looks like bringing together representatives from student affairs, housing, the dining services, advising, career counseling, campus security, kind of all of these different parts of campus, so that people are speaking with a unified voice about the place that immigrant students hold on their campus and the contributions they make. In a K-12 setting, it might be different offices, but again, the sentiment is the same, which is sort of from a leadership perspective, expanding beyond the classroom educator to think about who is responsible for welcoming students and families. And I think I really kind of latched onto the phrase in your question about institutional arrangements, because that's the sort of constellation that I'm imagining there.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Kenter. And now I have the next question for our panelists. Let's talk about the barriers and challenges. What are the primary barriers, whether structural, cultural, or resource-based, that schools face when integrating refugees, asylees, and immigrant children? And how can these obstacles be addressed? I'd like to turn this to Director Stead first.
Thank you. I've really been thinking about this question and trying to decide which category, the structural, cultural, or resource, my answer fits into. But what I've been thinking a lot about lately are some of the tacit practices that exist in school systems that may that may create barriers. And I'll give you an example. I've worked with a lot of leaders over the years who are responsible for school scheduling, and very often the ENL schedule is among the last to be created. And from where I sit, when I think about that, I would like to see, and something we try to do in our school is to center the ELLs, right? To center the ENL schedule and then build around it. And there's a whole variety of reasons for why I'm saying this, because if you've ever done a master schedule in a school, you know that there's certain kinds of minutes that are required by the state when it comes to ENL. And so when you're not centering the L's, when you're doing that particular task, then we end up in a situation where maybe minutes aren't being met, or a teacher can't get to a certain group of students for whatever reason. So I've been thinking about, like, what are some of the tacit practices, right? They're almost like they're not formalized necessarily, but they are things that if they become part of that conversation around equity that is happening in schools, that it will help us center the L's a little bit more frequently, so that we can ensure that some of these barriers are not in place when it comes to their programming.
Okay, thank you so much, Director Stat. Dr. Cruz?
So there are a lot of primary barriers, I would think. We've talked about language barriers, cultural differences, and potential misunderstandings that can lead to larger issues. We've talked about trauma and trauma related to migration, displacement, past experiences of our newcomers, lack of access to resources, including some of the things we've talked about: healthcare, housing, food security. Then some structural barriers, such as inadequate funding and staffing, and Rachel alluded to this: a lack of teachers with the proper training to address the needs of English language learners. I think that in order to address some of these obstacles, we need to continue to provide intensive language support and programs that have been found to be successful over time. I'm a big proponent of bilingual education. Bilingual education has been documented to be successful. Dual language programs have been documented to be very successful. If you look at data of former English language learners, what you find is that they outperform our monolingual English speakers over time. So we need to continue to fund these programs and continue to broaden them. Transitional programs as well, but those are looking to transition the kids into the English programs, which have, they all have a role in addressing the needs of our immigrant children. We've talked about implementing trauma-informed practices and providing access to mental health services for both the students and the families, because this has to extend well beyond the students that we serve in our schools. Establishing those partnerships with those community organizations, and Albany has a lot of partnerships, as Rachel has shared. We have a lot of partnerships in this BOCES. We bring a task force together of agencies across the counties that we serve to talk about how we can work together with schools to address the needs of our students and our families. And we really need to increase the funding for schools that have large immigrant student populations. We know that these students need additional supports and resources, and we need to ensure that this funding goes to these systems.
All right, thank you, Dr. Cruz. Dr. Kenter, do you share some similar thoughts and have some more additions?
Yeah, thank you. I think that my fellow panelists covered probably the biggest ones, but I have two things that I wanted to offer in thinking about this. So when we talk about migration-related trauma, I think it's important also to hold the complexities of students' feelings about their countries of origin and their experiences. There is trauma both in what they experienced and in being asked to just sort of wholly denigrate the place they came from, when they also hold very positive memories of their years in their country of origin. And so I think that it is important in working through that and in thinking about supporting students through post-migration trauma to also hold space for the things that they love about the place where they spent the first years of their life. And that is something that gets lost, particularly in an immigration system where, to justify your presence in the US, you are asked to consistently talk about how awful things were in the place where you came from, if you're pursuing a humanitarian pathway. So that's one piece. And then, kind of, I think also important, maybe less kind of visceral, is, and this is more relevant to high school arrivals. In a lot of countries, high school ends earlier than it does in the US. And so if you take a 16-year-old who thinks that they're done with high school and is thinking about higher education, and you say to them, actually, not only do I suggest that you go back to high school, but I suggest that you do 4 full years here to kind of build up your language comfort, to establish residency in order to be considered an in-state student. That's pretty upsetting. I think about myself about to graduate high school, and if you told me I had to start over, that would not have felt very good if I was kind of ready for my next step. And so that's another thing to think about is when counseling newcomer high school students is talking through their different options with them, whether you recommend enrollment in a high school and why, if there are dual enrollment opportunities for them, if they're expecting to work, kind of how that can figure into their schedule. But thinking about the fact that students may be coming from school systems with very different structures, and then also with different ways of engaging with their teachers as well. They may be coming from a system where speaking up in a classroom is not as common. And so then they're asked why they're not participating when they see that as disrespectful. So kind of keeping in mind those cultural differences and systemic differences between schools, between national school systems as well.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kenter. Since Dr. Cruz, Dr. Kenter, and also Director Seth mentioned a little bit about trauma, I would like to ask questions about mental health interventions. As you mentioned, many immigrant children arrive with pre-migration trauma. So what effective school-based mental health prevention and treatment models that you have seen? Some have been mentioned by Dr. Kenter, and how they can be scaled to support more children. I would turn this to Director Stat.
Thank you. So I did mention previously that we have done a lot of work around restorative practices, and I think when I think in terms of a scale, that is a tier 1 practice in our school, which means that all students have access to that, and it is part of our core practices in the building. We are using it's a program called Ruler. It's out of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. And so we really are consistent. The teachers are consistent in their practice with having students talk about feelings, like recognizing their feelings, naming their feelings, this understanding that there is no bad feeling. A feeling is a legitimate feeling, and then really the focus is on how you use that, how you respond to the feeling, and move throughout your day. And so that has, with regard to scale, actually, that's something that our entire district is using in their tier 1. So all of the schools use that. And so we have seen success with that. One of the things that we also do is we use those circles as a daily practice, but then we also leverage them when we do see the kinds of cross-cultural kinds of misunderstandings that might arise, as Dr. Cruz mentioned before. That is something that we see. And so because the students are used to that structure, they're used to sharing out in that kind of a format, we are able to leverage that to help bridge some of the misunderstandings in our school. I did mention too the Strong for Schools, the program that we're piloting this year. It is an evidence-based intervention, and it is free. If anyone wanted to Google it, I can share the link so that gets shared out. There are materials and resources in not only English, but also in Spanish, French, and Arabic. So it can be used in a bilingual setting with a bilingual provider. We are starting, because it's a pilot, we're just starting to see some of the results of that, but they seem to be very positive and students seem to be responding to that. So those are two things that we've used in our schools.
Thank you, Director Stead. Dr. Cruz, what do you think of this?
So we've talked about some of these things, right? So school-based mental health clinics. For immigrant children, we need to have in those clinics bilingual therapists, right? And we all know that there's shortage of a lot of different types of expertise. I think that we need to find ways to encourage individuals to go into these fields of study. So whenever I have an opportunity with policymakers, I talk about, we need to find ways to attract and make these professions, realistic to a lot of these individuals, because if the programs I spoke about that we're doing here, our teaching assistants and our teachers are getting these courses at no cost to them. What they're putting in is the time. So I think we need to think about how we can scale this type of support for especially bilingual experts, bilingual therapists, bilingual counselors, bilingual social workers. Within the BOCES, it's a structure that we are able to support our districts in working with the counties to develop these school-based mental health clinics and get aid on these services to stretch the dollars, if I may say. So that is something that we are able to do, and we're able to scale that support throughout the districts with very close partnerships with our county mental health clinics and our mental health departments. We also need to think about peer support programs and mentoring initiatives. These have proven to be very successful, and there's a lot of research around these. So how we can bring these into schools, and some of our schools are bringing them in to support our students, because we're finding students with more mental health needs at an earlier age. And this is not only in our region, not only in our state, it's a national reality. So we need to find ways to support our students with peers, mentors. Those are very successful. I can't stress enough the importance of having culturally sensitive counseling services, therapy services. That is critical to helping our students, because they are trained in having those sensitivities around diverse populations. So and the realities that our immigrant children bring to our school systems. So those are some things that that have been proven successful, and we need to continue to explore. There needs to be increased funding. Wherever I have an opportunity to say it, I'm going to say it. There needs to be increased funding for school-based mental health services. And we need to be able to continue to scale these and have these pretty much in every school, because the need is so large.
Yep, agreed. Thank you so much, Dr. Cruz. Dr. Kenter?
I'll be quick since I know I've spoken on this already. The one thing that I want to add based off of what Dr. Cruz just shared in terms of culturally sensitive, responsive, and sustaining practices is also to remember that we need counselors and mental health professionals who are equipped to address intersectional identities as well. So oftentimes the needs of Black immigrant students are not fully addressed by services geared towards Black identities, nor towards those geared toward immigrant identities, and that there are complexities in holding those kind of combined experiences as well. So just recalling that one, a student being an English language learner does not mean that they are an immigrant. And two, that students might have different immigration statuses that are not apparent when you look at them. And so thinking through who might need that kind of support.
Okay, thank you so much. And now we want to talk a little bit about policy implications. What policy changes at the local or state level do you believe are critical for creating an environment that better supports the unique challenges and needs of foreign-born children in school? Dr. Kenter, would you like to start this time?
Oh, absolutely. You knew that I loved this question. I have a whole list of policies, and I saw that a few were shared in the Q&A already, which I was really excited to see elevated. And so I think I would like to talk about one bill that is currently under consideration in New York State, which is the Empire State Licensing Act. So for those who are not as in the weeds as we are at the President's Alliance, the Empire State Licensing Act has to do with professional and occupational licensure for all individuals, regardless of immigration status. I think there's often an assumption that New York State is, one of the leaders and most progressive. This is my somewhat dour reminder that New York State did not have the DREAM Act until 2019. So there's room for growth. The Empire State Licensing Act would allow individuals, as I said, to obtain the kinds of licenses that they need in order to pursue their professional ambitions after their educational experience, without regard to their immigration status. And the reason that this is a policy that I really want to emphasize is because you will encounter students who say, what can I do with my education? There is an inherent value to them being in school, of course, and it is meaningful beyond their career. But there's also nothing anti-intellectual about wanting to make money and to support your family. And so policies that can provide opportunities for students to apply their education, whether from K-12 or from higher ed, whether it's to start businesses or work in the healthcare sector, or kind of any of the high need sectors that we have in New York State, providing access to professional and occupational licensure would go a really, really long way in kind of facilitating that step beyond education.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kenter. Dr. Cruz, would you like to share your thoughts?
Sure. So I'm going to talk about funding again. So increase funding for bilingual education and ENL programs. We also need to make sure that we create opportunities for educators to be able to pursue those bilingual education expert fields of social work and counseling, psychologists, for bilingual individuals. It's also important that we need to have legislation that protects the rights of immigrant students and families. We're living right now in a very difficult political space, that, and children capture this, right? They are feeling this. I talked about a program that I'm very close to, the Puerto Rican Hispanic Youth Leadership Institute. We brought over 250 high school students from across the state of New York to Albany to debate bills in the Assembly Chamber just a couple weeks ago, the week of March 8th through 10. And there was, in my visits around the state to the local delegations, there's a student that wrote a poem, and I'm just going to read a little piece to you because it just shows where students, they're picking this up and they are being impacted by this. And this is a student from New York City, from the New York City delegation, student from the Port Richmond High School. And she said, and her poem is, "Where did my people go?" And she says, when you're born on American soil, you don't think anything will go wrong. When I look at myself, I see I'm the same color as my immigrant parents. Brown eyes, brown skin, black shiny hair like my mother. I walk out my house and smell a new day, but I walk out and don't see my people on the corner nor the streets taking their children to school. I sense danger is near. Where did the hands that feed us go? So, this is what our kids, and that's just a little excerpt of the poem. So this is what our kids are experiencing, right? So we need to make sure that we have legislation that protects them, the children, the families, and of immigrants. We need to make sure that we promote cultural competency and anti-discrimination in schools, streamline the pathways for immigrant teachers. We bring with the immigrant families, there's a lot of professionals that come here. So we need to look for ways to help them uh, become certified if they're in the education field. Look for ways to support them, because they can then support the students in our school systems. And I'm going to continue to sound like a broken record. We need to continue to fund mental health services in schools.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you, Dr. Cruz. Director Stead?
So I don't know how I can follow that poem. That was incredibly powerful. Thank you for sharing that. So when I was thinking about policy, I was thinking about what's the impact on a building on the day to day, and the one thing that jumped into my mind first was transportation. Currently the transportation policy, my understanding of it in New York State is that school districts are reimbursed for a certain distance, between home and school, and then anything within that 1.5 miles is not. And so this impacts transportation, which can sometimes and oftentimes actually impacts attendance. So that would be one area that I would recommend that we take another look at to support our multilingual learning families.
Okay, thank you so much, Director Stead. So now I will welcome questions from the audience. I've already got a couple of questions here. So if you still have some more questions, please make sure to type in your answers in the chat box so that I could read it and ask the panelists to answer the questions. The first one that we have here is a question related to teachers. Given the unprecedented volume of new English language learners, K-12 students among asylum seekers coming to New York State, has the NL teaching capacity of schools in New York State been able to keep up with the demand? Do we need more ENL teachers? Any recommendations for School of Education in New York State for the training of ENL teachers? Who would like to share their thoughts first on this?
I can tell you from a region, there is ESL, ENL teachers, bilingual teachers, there's always been a shortage, and that hasn't changed. There is a shortage of ENL bilingual teachers. So unfortunately, we have not been able to keep up with the needs. And recommendations. So I think it's important to try to find ways to work with institutions of higher education to educate, to train, to uplift those educators, whether they're in TA positions, that we can then continue the pipeline, develop our own pipeline, because we know that there has been a decrease of individuals going into the education field. So we need to look for ways to increase that pipeline.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Cruz. Dr. Kenter?
I think I will leave this one for the other panelists since I'm not as expert in bilingual education, but Dr. Cruz, we should talk offline more about partnerships with higher ed, certainly.
Perfect, thank you. Director Stead.
Sure. So I can speak from the building level, and I also want to lift what Dr. Cruz said because while certainly there's a shortage, there's really a shortage of bilingual certified teachers. So I would say from the building perspective, our relationships with the institutions of higher education in the region who prepare teachers have been invaluable because we have been able to start a little bit of a pipeline of, for example, undergraduate pre-service teachers who come and do some field experience in our building, and then they are thinking about their master's programs and which, where they'd like to specialize. And so having had that experience, some of them are choosing to go into the TESOL master's program or getting the bilingual extension. So I think if you are an institution of higher ed with a teacher prep program, I would encourage you to seek out those relationships with schools where you do know that there are high, numbers of English language learners, multilingual learners, so that students get that exposure, and then you can cultivate that interest in that pipeline.
Okay, thank you, Director Stepp. So I have a follow-up question related to that. This is from me, related to teachers. So do you think that probably technology can also be included by teachers? Technology can be leveraged to support immigrant children's learning, particularly in bridging language gaps and providing additional educational resources outside the classroom?
I would say yes. And with the rise of artificial intelligence tools, you can find tools that can support your teaching and learning. Tools that read to the children, that can record them, and then they can listen to themselves. There are a lot of tools out there that I think can be used to uplift language learning. I think back at when I was a teacher in Puerto Rico, and I was over there. Remember those cassettes? Those cassettes well, many of you probably don't know about them. But so I used to do cassettes at home in the summer, send them to the families so that we could learn English together. And I created my own program. Let's learn English together. Because parents would tell me, I want to help my children, but I don't know English. So those are, now with I mean, I think the opportunities are limitless with everything you could potentially do in a classroom with all the technology and AI tools out there. It's exciting.
Indeed. Director Stepp?
I agree with everything that Dr. Cruz just shared. And so I'm not going to duplicate it. But what I will say is the one caveat I see is sometimes technology leads to an over-reliance on translation as the tool and not language development. And so while I think we're in an exciting time with AI for all the reasons that Dr. Cruz just mentioned, I wonder sometimes if the volume, right, the increased volume of English language learners in our schools, combined with what we talked about before, with teachers who may not have had the training and how to instruct them, has led to maybe a little bit of an over reliance on translation as the answer. And I think we can do better than that. And for with a lot of the ideas that Dr. Cruz just talked about, leveraging technology in those ways.
Yeah.
And if I can just add, and Rachel knows this because we've known each other for many, many years, I would definitely find ways to use technology to strengthen the native language first. I've said that I'm a big proponent of bilingual education, and then find supports for that transition into the second or third language. I think it's critical to strengthen that native language. The research is very clear on this, as we all know, in terms of you have a strong base in your native language. It's easier to learn a second, third language.
Thank you, Dr. Cruz. Dr. Kenter, would you like to share some more thoughts?
I thought I saw Dr. Refke's hand up. Did you want to weigh in here?
Oh,
No, pressed by mistake, Dr. Kim.
Oh, okay. Um, yeah, I think a lot about the way that language is always language is never something that we own individually. It is always social and contextual. And so technology and AI is kind of a new partner in that activity. And I'm not in the classroom, so I won't speak to kind of how to integrate that. What I will say from a sort of policy and data nerd perspective is also just as you're implementing new technologies in your schools, just to be really conscious of your data protections policies and ensuring that any contractor that you work with is also subject to the same privacy constraints as any full-time employee on your campus. So just that's a sort of a reminder in terms of being conscientious about student privacy and ensuring that any new technology or new tech contractor abides by your given policies. And I'm happy to talk to anyone offline additionally about ways to make sure that student information is protected.
Yeah, it's a very good addition, making sure that their data is protected for sure. There's another question here. How are we planning to target kids in rural areas and farm working communities? This particular person asking this question said, my agency is noticing they will not go to school. Are there any plans to help with truancy in these cases? Anyone would like to respond to that?
I would like to elevate what Rachel shared earlier about the importance of transportation in these instances in particular. You may have students that are coming from areas that are not well served by transportation, and that can make a huge difference in their ability to access school. And I would also say there is a lot of heightened fear at this moment in time about immigration enforcement, both for non-citizen children and then for citizen children with non-citizen parents and family members. And so I think a really key point, particularly if in not just in rural areas, but in experiences of truancy in general, is to think about ways to make it secure and safe for families to go to school. And so we didn't talk about this in the mental health section, but it is important for us to acknowledge that mental health impacts are not just pre-migration or from migration journeys. Those are continuing to happen right now as our families are contending with a lot of fear and anxiety around going into any public service space. And if they're in a rural area, school may be the place where they feel the most seen and visible. And so that could be, I would guess that is a contributing factor.
Okay.
So we've seen school attendance be affected during and after the pandemic. And now with the heightened fear that Dr. Kenter just talked about, we're seeing a lot of families keeping children home for various reasons, right? There's a lot of fear, either as Dr. Kenter said, families may not have the the status to be here, and there's fear that they may lose their children may be picked up, the families may be picked up. There's a lot of fear. I think it's important to continue to work, and there's systems are working on the student attendance issues, school-wide, district-wide. I think it's important to give special, care to these particular cases. We have rural districts in our region that have a large migrant populations, and there's a lot of fear. And there's fear because in the deportations in the previous Trump administration, there were ICE and deportation officials parking in parking lots close to the school and following school buses home. So these are stories that have come to me from superintendents in my region. And so parents are very fearful of sending their children to school. I think it's important to work closely with the school officials and with the families to ensure that the children will be safe coming to school. There was a lot of fear about sending those 250 plus students from across the state to that institute this past March 8 through 10. And I spoke to the commissioner. There was a memo issued by the Attorney General, the commissioner's office, and the governor's office to around the protection of our students' rights. So I think it's important to continue to educate our families in not only rural areas, across the board, on the fact that schools are safe spaces.
Agree. Director Stead?
Really, I would echo everything that was said, and just kind of lift that last point around the schools communicating with the families. We know that often there is that language barrier, and our experience is we're not always sure what messages the families are receiving, but we can be sure about the messages we send. And so our superintendent came out early on with a commitment to supporting all students, sharing information about plans within the district, how we might respond, all in line with state ed and the Attorney General's guidance. And I would just add to the rural school district that asked that question is also make sure that that's getting communicated back to the families so that they can also feel safe.
Okay, thank you so much. So I think I would like to turn this to Dr. Rafki.
Well, thank you so much all for these wonderful insights. I wanted to ask Dr. Cruz and Dr. Cantor in particular about whether there is anything, and of course, Director Stead, whether there are efforts to, and specific programs to promote cultural competency and anti-discrimination within the classroom and outside of the classroom that you're seeing. And we do need more of those, obviously, because we can only guess that this anti-immigrant rhetoric is really seeping in our communities.
So there is a framework on cultural responsive teaching in New York State that's actually very good. And we're fortunate to have that Arburn and Arboces that supports over 150 districts in 9 counties that really support our educators with a training around these strategies. And I'll look for the links and put it in the chat, but it's that resource has different levels, all the way from the district level to the teacher level, a lot of practical suggestions to support culturally sensitivity and practices in the classroom. So that's a resource that New York State has put out, and it's very good. And I know that schools across our state are using it, and even across our country. I know a lot of schools that look at that resource.
That's a great resource to have access to. I think one thing that I'll say that we're seeing a lot of is concerns about whether particular programs or initiatives might be targeted under recent executive orders, and a trend of what's called preemptive compliance, which is basically adjusting programs and policies and practices at a school before actually mandated to do so in an effort to avoid retributive action. It's something that we really discourage schools and campuses from doing. We really do encourage you to retain your programming while also making sure that that students have access to private and safe spaces where they can get the services that they need. And I think that there are a lot of really fantastic programs already in place at schools. And so my suggestion right now is don't get rid of them. I know that it is a time that is where you are facing a lot of different pressures. And if you'd like to talk about ways to frame those programs to make your leadership feel more comfortable, I'm happy to do that as well. But I do think that it's important to remember that while we focused on recently arrived and immigrant origin populations today, these are practices that are good for all students. They are good for all of the families in our schools. You are in New York City or New York State, there are a lot of different people here. This is programs that elevate cultural difference are good for everyone in your school. And so I think that is an important reminder as well that these are not, even though it is good to have things that are specifically geared towards immigrant populations, they're actually for a lot more than that. And that's one thing to keep in mind.
I think that's a critical point that you just made, right? Because we're preparing students for life beyond school, and life beyond school is very diverse, right? And we're preparing students for a global society, and that's very diverse. So thank you for uplifting that point.
If you don't mind me adding, I think that question is just so timely because in order to participate in this webinar today, I stepped away from the Equity Summit that our school district is holding today. It's actually just down the hall. There's representatives from all of the schools, and they are sharing practices. They've been sharing things related to the equity initiatives in each of the buildings so we can all learn from each other. But I think it also highlights the fact that equity and that cross-cultural competence, inclusion, that is an ongoing conversation in our district. It has been even prior to when I started here. We have equity teams in every building. We have student equity teams so we can lift the voices and experiences of the students, and by extension, their families. And so, I think that, to answer the question, the work continues, and it must.
You. Dr. Raki, do we still have time for more questions?
Yes, I think we go until 12, yes.
Okay, we still have more questions. So we have more questions here. I want to ask the panelists on how schools can actively engage immigrant parents and families who may face language barriers or unfamiliarity with the U.S. educational system to ensure better academic and social outcomes for their children. So I'd like to start this with Dr. Kenter, who has already done a lot of work on like transition to higher education and involving families.
Yeah, I think this is sort of a cheating answer, but when you're working with a student, sometimes that you are seeing them in the student role, but they may very well be in a caregiver role in another educational context. So something that I saw a lot in my prior research was students who were entering college who were then going back to their siblings, elementary and middle schools, and acting as, access professionals, advocates, and had very different experiences when they were in the student role versus in the caregiver role. And I think this is a good moment for us to sort of pause and think about why is that? Why does someone feel very empowered to advocate for their younger sibling, but disempowered to advocate for themselves? And so when it comes to kind of engaging with families, maybe remembering that they are having multiple interactions with multiple school systems at the same time. You may have somebody who is, a community college student and also the parent of an elementary schooler and also the sibling of someone, pursuing a master's degree or something like that. And so when it comes to family engagement, trying to leverage that expertise that people gather from their different educational contexts that they're interacting with is also really valuable. Again, a cheating answer, but this goes back to an earlier question on recruiting professionals to work in educational settings. You have students who are coming with a bunch of skills and expertise ready to go. In the chancellor's remarks, I heard echoes of our recent Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona, who often said being bilingual is a superpower. It's a superpower and it's a really, really good skill. that students can then bring into careers in educational settings as well. So when it comes to family engagement, I guess my answer is families are there, and it's up to us to kind of notice that they're there and that they're bringing a lot of knowledge as well.
I made a mistake, Adriana, so please feel free to close us out. We end at 11:30, actually. I apologize for the mistake.
Yeah, I'm just afraid that our panelists probably have prior engagements following this webinar. So do we have time to probably have Director Stead and also Dr. Cruz to share a little bit on what their thoughts on this?
If panels can stay with us, I apologize for the mistake.
Okay. So Director Stead and Dr. Cruz, would you like to share your thoughts on engaging families and then also how schools actively can engage immigrant parents?
Yeah, I can speak to what this looks like in my school. We have a pretty comprehensive intake process. We have an intake team, so we have thought about, to Dr. Kenter's point from earlier, who are the first people who are interfacing when with families, and how are we making them feel welcome from the very beginning. And so we walk them through a lot of different things related to schooling, related to the resources that we connect them with in the community. And what I think their takeaway is that they start to recognize the school as a resource, and that keeps them coming back. It keeps the doors open. And I think initially in their experience, right, that's what they need, right? They need those resources. They need to be connected to the pantry, to healthcare, to all of those things. And so I mentioned we have some community engagement liaisons who are bilingual, bicultural, and the relationship that we establish with the families from the get-go, I think really goes a long way, because over time, as they keep coming back, then they start coming back to our student events. Then they start, maybe attending our PTA meetings, or, we see a high rate of parent conference, attendees. And so I think that it really starts with that initial team, and it is about the relationship building and being seen as a resource. And the other thing that's really unique about my school is, because we have the dual language program, we also have English speaking families who make up half of that program. They're families who've lived here for a long time. And our PTA is also very actively trying to always think about, how do we make sure that all the families for this event are informed about it, have no barriers to being able to access it, and how do we ensure that they're part of it. And so I think that those things have gone a long way in our school to trying to increase that family engagement.
And last but not least, Dr. Cruz, would you like to share a little bit?
Sure. So I would say just meet the parents where they are. I have never met a parent that doesn't want the best for their children. I have, in my different roles, done a lot of workshops with parents. I try to, because I speak Spanish fluently, I've done many workshops in Spanish, and just continue to because school can be intimidating, and that establishing those parent liaison positions that are bilingual, bicultural, as Rachel Stead shared, it's critical. And wherever possible, offer translation or interpretation services, because we really need to meet them where they are and in a language that they best understand.
So much, Dr. Cruz. So to appreciate to be respectful of everyone's time, we apologize for not being able to answer all questions that probably are still left, because we're running out of time. But as we conclude today's seminar, I want to express my deep appreciation to our esteemed panelists for their expertise and thoughtful contributions. A special thank you to Dr. Refke and our hosts for organizing this critical conversation. And of course, thank you to all of our attendees for your engagement and commitment to supporting immigrant children in education. We hope this discussion has provided valuable insights and actionable strategies that you can take back to your communities and institutions. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we look forward to continuing these important conversations in the future. And I'm turning this back to Dr. Rafki if Dr. Rafki would like to conclude this webinar.
Thank you so much, Adriana. Thank you, esteemed panelists. This has been a wonderful and insightful discussion. Thank you for sharing with us the incredible work that you do every day. You really inspire us and motivate us to keep going and to keep moving. I would like to thank Guillermo Martinez, my colleague and deputy director of the Institute, who is really a powerful force behind everything that is happening at the Institute and everything that is going to happen. Please join us for the upcoming webinar in April, on April 24th, on building inclusive workplace cultures. Another webinar is in May, where we will share some of our findings on the state of social integration, the results of work and surveys that we've done with our foreign-born communities in New York State, and of course our annual conference on June 16th, which will be a one-day in-person conference in Albany, New York, at the University at Albany, but also with a virtual option if you're not able to make it in person. Again, thank you for our moderator, Adriana Mantersi, for a wonderful job. Thank you, Dr. Karen Kenter, Dr. Gladys Cruz, and Director Rachel Stead, and of course, Guillermo Martinez for this wonderful webinar. Have a wonderful rest of your day and take good care.